I'm the Chief Information Officer for the town and for the public schools. So what that means in a nutshell is I'm essentially responsible for the computing environment that's used by the folks that work here, the students, the residents, the community, basically anybody looking to do anything with the town, as we call it, anybody who wants to interact and transact with the town and with the public schools. So, in a nutshell, the Office of the Chief Information Officer really has three primary responsibilities. The primary one, meaning if this doesn't go well, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about, is, the reality is we run a utility. So, as I said, what you folks do for using the network, what Mr. Fisher does to use the applications to update your grades and your homework and your assignments, we do roughly $10 million of e-commerce annually. All of our staff and, certainly all of the public uses our computing environment to do stuff. And if that doesn't work, if it's down, if it's out, if we have outages, that's a problem. So we call it a utility because it's very much like the power in this building. If it were off 2 hours a day, it would be pretty difficult to do anything. And the same with computers. The primary goal is to make sure that that's running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We don't always get there, but for the most part, our eyes are on that objective almost exclusively. The other piece of the job that I have, and by extension the group, is really to drive innovation. So we use technology, hopefully to do good things. And what we're certainly cognizant of is that we spend other people's money. The taxpayers are the reason we're here, and they fund everything that we do. We also need to, have good expectations among the staff here that people have the same expectations of what we say the public sector that they do the private sector. And technology, I think, has made it easier for us to step up our game a little bit. But you see variable levels of that in certain government organizations. Some of them are further ahead than others. But our challenge is to continue to use technology to do more and to hopefully provide a better service level. We're trying to make technology much more user-friendly, much more relevant to the public, because that's, again, one of the knocks on what we do as an organization, government, is that you have to stop what you're doing, you have to come to our offices, you have to do it during our time, during our hours, and certainly stand in line. We need to be able to be more receptive. Private companies have already solved that problem. So I'll talk a little bit about the challenges, and this is really where, I think it speaks to, some of the things I think you'll be wrestling with here, in the short term. We live, as you know, in a very interconnected world, and there's a lot of great in that. You all got devices, that you either have or you have access to that have more power than anybody ever had 20 years ago, and that allows you to do a world of different things, and it certainly gives you an advantage that no generation's ever had. That's the good part. The challenging part of that is that because you're connected to a global community, now you got all the bad that comes with that. And all the cyberbullying and certainly all those types of things that exist, certainly beyond school. It exists in the rest of the world. Doesn't matter what you're doing or what your vocation is, you're always going to run into bullies on the internet, and because you're connected to them, and they could be sitting next door to you, they could be sitting on the other side of the world. There's a tremendous amount of emphasis right now on, probably the biggest single challenge that that certainly the United States has, in my opinion, which is cyber terrorism. And there's an awful lot of emphasis being placed right now that we're behind the eight ball in terms of the amount of information security folks that we're generating. We're getting hit like we've never been hit before in terms of just being able to protect ourselves. So, the terrorism is, the extreme example, but just on a daily basis, you've got cyber extortion, you've got intellectual property theft, and you've got extortion. So you've got, people that are either looking to steal your identity because, again, even 5 years ago, your identity, your name, your address, your date of birth, and your income level, that was worth about $12 to somebody on the street. It's worth about $2 now because there's so much of it. And people make money because they can list thousands of people and sell it on the black market. So every time you hear about a supermarket or a credit card agency that gets hit, that's ultimately what they're after. Extortion, that's something that is very real. And as a municipality, we're keenly aware of that, where somebody can hack into your system and take it offline and then say, I'll turn it back on when you give me $10,000. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night right now in terms of how do you better protect yourself against that. Intellectual property. So you folks are all, beginning your careers and you're heading off in different directions. Some of you will invent stuff and some of you will, be very integral in starting companies. Think of how bad it's going to be when you spend your life, your life's work is on developing a product and somebody hacks into your system and steals your information and basically takes your idea overseas and figure out how to build it for 15 cents. And you've got a lot of money into that. And the third piece is to create efficiency. And everything we're doing, so by running a good, efficient environment and using technology to do more and creating more value and being able to make it easier, we're hopefully staying out of your way so that you can come in every day and use the computers and use the infrastructure and do whatever it is you got to do. In order to do more of that, we need to be as efficient as possible, and that means typically savings of dollars, savings on time, saving on infrastructure costs, et cetera. So to the extent that we can use technology to lower the cost of our operations, that's more funds are able to go in other areas and go into other critical investments. So we're certainly not the driver for the organization, but technology touches a lot of what's going on in the town and the school side. So we try to continue to work with all the departments and make sure that we're plugged in and that we're attuned to what's going on. Any questions on any of that? The question is, do we have a role? And I'll paraphrase it a little bit. Do we have a role in what we block on the web filter? Absolutely. And and from my standpoint, and in fairness to the IT department, what we try to do is make the choices. We make it aware, or we make the folks aware on the school side what we think is appropriate. It's not rocket science. We call them the bad seven in terms of what we block. The problems we run into more often than not is a little background. When you set up a website, you sort of categorize it and you put keywords in what this website does. And some websites, when they're set up, they're not set up properly, so they actually characterize themselves as having something. So you could be going into a site that's perfectly legitimate, perfectly educational. Somebody cut corners and said, yeah, we also sell guns. And that one little tag will trigger, not only our robot, because it's all a robot that does it, but not only our robot to make a decision, but most other places. So to an extent, web servers have what's the same as caller ID. So some web servers, they don't set it up properly, and that's why sometimes emails get blocked and things like that, because it's typically it's two ends, and if one end isn't set up the right way, the other end doesn't know what it's talking to, and you have something like that happening. Ooh. The question is, do I get notifications? I don't know how much I should tell you folks, because in theory, we're arch enemies here.
Notified of anything I'm doing.
No, to the extent that our environment's largely managed by robots. So we tell the robots what to block and what to look out for. It's not like any of us have time all day. As part of let me clarify this, as part of a investigation, we have the ability to go back and look at a lot of stuff. But there's not things beeping in places that will say, oh, somebody's doing something that they're not supposed to. You get that scary page that pops up there. We do that to let people know we're out there. The question was our relationship with Brookline Wireless, which is actually run by Galaxy Internet Services. So we actually partnered with Galaxy. This is going on about 5 years ago now. So we actually the first community nationwide that we built a town-wide wireless network, which was pretty cool. So the relationship we have with them is that we call it access for access. So we gave them access to put their infrastructure on our telephone pole so they could sell it to the community. And we got a couple of benefits out of that. We have some free areas, some free parks, and then we also use it in terms of our public safety folks actually use the network to communicate and things like that. So we've got a nice relationship with them. The question is, in terms of the IT budget specifically? Yeah, we actually go through a fairly rigorous process. In fact, I think we spend 10 months a year talking about budgets. The challenge always is that your budget is a function of your justification, your output, and any of your strategic initiatives. The one thing I'll say is that as an aggregate, the IT budget's actually gone down over the last 8 years. And I'll say that because it's not a bad thing. To me, that's my job. My job is to do more with less, and you're using technology to lower the cost. Sometimes I run into a challenge where there's a cost that we're picking up beyond something that we've traditionally picked up, but you're trying to quantify a whole bunch of savings, smaller savings in a bunch of other areas that might be savings in terms of people time or real dollars as they're called. But typically our budgets are generally flat, and you're trying to do what you did last year plus more with the same amount of funding. So they generally, you don't generally have conversations about them going up. You generally have conversations about keeping them where they are. And again, in fairness to all you folks, we're spending money that's the public's money, so we need to be responsible with that. It is a big responsibility.
Can you talk a little bit? You mentioned that besides Brookline Wireless, you mentioned that you're doing infrastructure for the government. Can you just where else are your tentacles?
Sure. Our organization actually, and I should clarify that, we have 36 locations, believe it or not. So within the town, we have 36 locations, and that's the cemetery, that's certainly all the schools, it's all the town buildings, all of the facilities that we have. They're all connected via a fiber network now, so we have a very large infrastructure to support. So we spend a lot of our time making sure those 36 locations are up, and certainly making sure that they're working at the best possible performance that they can. So we have a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that we're following generally accepted practices. We're trying to figure out problems or anticipate problems before they actually occur. So there's a whole science behind running a large organization like that. Requires that you have a lot of planning discussions, and you have a lot of conversations around how do I continue to grow this, make it work more cheaply, but also be more reliable. And you're dealing with in the IT world, it's the nines of efficiency. So they always talk about whether it's in terms of 4 nines or 5 nines. It's 99.99 or 99.999, and that's the difference between 2 hours and 2 minutes. And 2 hours if you're an e-commerce company is unacceptable. 2 hours if you're a healthcare provider is unacceptable. So it really kind of depends on your business, and the role of IT is pretty general in most organizations, that you're trying to make sure that those nines have there's as many nines as possible. In our world's a little bit different, in terms of what we spend on it and what we have for resources, but we have the same goal here that we would have, in any other organization. A lot of the things that we're talking about, we've got on one hand, we've got all this technology and smartphones, and more importantly, the willingness or the want to be able to be flexible in how we do that. And on the other hand, you got all these bad things that can happen. How do you find that balance? And what is the right level of security, and what's the right level of awareness that you have to have out there so that you can continue to do both? That's a question nobody has an answer for right now, because it's all happening. It's all happening real time, and there's certainly no shortage of folks that are needed to solve that problem. But there's one thing that I would stress is that that's the single most important piece of IT right now that's getting the focus, is information security. The question is, do we design our own security systems? It's kind of a 3-part answer. For the most part, your security, there's what's called best or generally accepted practice, so best practice. So your security is really a philosophy, but it's almost like medicine, where they call it a practice. You're constantly looking at it, making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to, learning the new tricks that are out there, and then evolving. So you always want to make sure that you're cognizant of what's going on in the world. You use companies that come out and will evaluate how well you're doing, and then you have companies that come out will actually try to hack into your systems. The one thing I'll say, because I'd be remiss if I didn't, the number one threat right now is still people. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just people, because you're all out on websites and you're all, doing whatever it is you're doing, everybody gets tricked, and everybody's entitled to a bad day when you don't quite look at an email, and and you get those emails from your Facebook password needs to be reset. Click here to reset it. That's where a lot of the risk comes from. It's just a pure numbers game. There's a couple of thousand folks out here going to different places, and you only need a couple of them to click on something, and then that pulls something down, and that sits inside the network, and then all of a sudden you have what's called a botnet, where you've got, machines conspiring to do things. And trust.
These problems only manifest in the town-wide computers if they're accessed on town computers, like school computers, or would something from my personal computer or his personal computer get jam up the town-wide system even if we're not on Brookline Wireless?
No, you absolutely. There's a common point of connection at somewhere though. So if your computer's, doesn't matter what you're doing with it, but if it's on a network here, and I think by wireless you probably mean the Brookline High guest one, or as a student temp?
Yeah,
Yeah, that student temp one is actually the same network that we do administrative work on, that, you know, we're firewalled off from each other, but at the end of the day, we're connected up a couple of levels higher than that. So there really is no separation. And more often than not, you know, then these are, again, other things that scare me a little bit, is that folks could be doing work at home on their computer, and then they connect into an application here, and what they're doing is potentially bringing things in. It's like, you know, Yes.
So are you actually able to see, I have a different network at my house, are you able to see, because it's still the same town, what I'm doing on my computer, and like, are you like actually allowed to go into residents' internet history, or see what they're doing on their computer?
Yeah, certainly not. If you're in your own home on your own network, I can only see if you come into my environment. And for the most part, if you've got yeah, I could see that somebody connected to that. I wouldn't be able to go through the web page to see what you're doing. However, if there's something on your computer that wanted to go through our web page to come the other way, that could conceivably happen. And that's why a lot of times, if folks haven't set up a wireless network properly at their house, haven't set up their router, you could actually basically allow the open door where people could come in. That's in theory what your firewall does, or your router does, is it blocks anybody from coming in from the outside.